Hi, welcome to Modern Papist. My name's Ryan. I'd like to go over the Family of Parishes announcement that the Archdiocese gave out today. So I'm in the Archdiocese of Detroit. I know other dioceses have done this, but right now I'm just going to focus on the Diocese of Detroit because that's where I live. And I do think this is very important. So, what is the Family of Parishes announcement? It's an announcement that came today, and it's an extension of a synod that happened in 2016 called Synod 16. And so basically, they wanted to make the parishes restructured in such a way that they're more mission-oriented, and this is an extension of that. And so they cite that one of the main reasons that they're introducing this now is because of the economic stability and the pandemic influencing and accelerating the need for this to happen. And I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's a good move, at least from my end, because I will go over it. But I actually really like this idea. I think this plan is very good. So in the time frame of this is 2 years. There's going to be a finalized version in Advent of 2020, and in 2021 January we're going to have the first wave, and then in July 2022 is when we're going to have the second wave. So it's going to take a few years for this to happen, and I think that's a smart approach, not just to overlay this all at once. I think that's really good, at least from my standpoint. We have about 220 parishes in the Archdiocese of Detroit. How many families are there going to be? And they anticipate 60 to 80 families, which makes sense because the structure of it is going to be 3 to 6 parishes make a family. And so in that family, you could share resources, like you could have a music director that goes to all 3 to 6, a bookkeeper. The priests will be utilized potentially in such a way where they'll do, mass at several places, or other functions. So it's a very interesting concept, but it leads to a lot of other questions, which we will get to, because they're very natural when you start saying, well, we're clustering together. What does that mean? So in terms of will all parishes be required to join it, they answer, while that other dioceses have made it so that large part parishes don't necessarily need to, in this diocese, so the Archdiocese of Detroit, it's going to be something where the governance team looks over and for the best interest of each community. So they're utilizing, I think, in a very appropriate way, the understanding of subsidiarity, which is obviously inherent to the Catholic Church, and respectful to the peoples in those areas, and that's really good to hear, at least from my standpoint. Here's the question that I think a lot of people are going to want to know, because obviously, are your parish pastors going to be influenced? And clearly they are. I'm going to just read this whole thing because I don't want to paraphrase anything they say, because it really is a very important part. From Pentecost to Advent, a team of priests and curia leaders will advise Archbishop Vigneron on the new governance and leadership structure for all the families of parishes in the Archdiocese. This time of discernment will include studying models and other dioceses have used. There will be consultation with these dioceses about what has worked and what hasn't worked. The goal is to establish a new structure that allows for multiple priests to serve the family of parishes with their unique talents and experiences, creating a leadership and governance structure that maximizes all our resources for mission. We know that roles will change for many priests. Based on conversations with other dioceses that have adopted similar models, we are confident that the structures adopted for families of parishes will make the best use of our priests' talents and charisms, allowing them to spend more time focusing on the very important work for which they were ordained, less focused on administrative, and more time ministering to the people of God. Now, that's great to hear, because, when you think about what a priest needs to be able to do, they kind of need to be a business leader, they kind of need to be a people person, they kind of need to be X, Y, and Z, you name it. basically being a spiritual father gets listed off with the rest of everything they need to do, and it's just one of those things where it gets there's a bunch of distractions to it, and I think that's really good that they want to focus more in on that aspect where it's more spiritually and less administrative in terms of like the paperwork and all this other stuff that they have to do. So they have a 6-month preparation time between the two waves. So if you're like January 2022 is when you start prepping for July 2022. Does this mean my parish may close, merge, or cluster, or that the parish site may close? So they state that it's not. They kind of state a no, yes. So the first one, it's not a cluster or merge parish, but they do share resources. And then there will come a time in this paragraph, there will come a time when they have to make honest reviews and be like, all right, well, can we stay open in light of the fact that we do have these other 2 buildings, 2 parishes that we can go to and become a fuller family there, or stay separated, or whether we're talking resources of any type, or the congregation themselves. So I think that's me paraphrasing, of course, in my interpretation, but I think that's really smart because, and not just to say we're all just merging together. Now, the question of, all right, well, who's going to lead these families is kind of important, given that the pandemic just happened and is still going on. And there is a possibility for a second wave that, what happens when you have a priest that doesn't want to be open? Say you have like St. John and St. Mary, St. John, all in the same family, and St. John, who's the leader of the family, so to speak, says, all right, well, we're not going to be open. Does that mean that St. Mary's isn't going to be open? And does that mean that both parishes lose access to the sacraments when they're given the options to do so? Which I know happened in the Archdiocese of Detroit, where parishes just closed up shop, even though the Archbishop gave them the option to be open. And so if you were part of those parishes that closed up shop, you had to go to confession somewhere else. And there were other places that had more hours for confession, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, those parishes might have closed if the leaders of their families were one of those that wanted everybody closed. And that seems to be a problem there. On top of that, you have the idea of, all right, well, are the priests who are leading it going to be Orthodox or not? In terms of, are there going to be an outstanding number of liturgical abuses? Given the fact that the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith, and the focus is on the Eucharist, as the essential aspect of our society, obviously paraphrased from the Archbishop, from what he said recently. That's really important, because then you have another someone who's done something they've always done the last 30 or 40 years, and then someone who may have just came out of seminary and is following what the church teaches to the best of his ability, and being undermined because the older priest wants to do it his way. Obviously, I'm a lay person. I'm not in charge of any of this stuff, but it's something I've recognized that happens in between priests, or I'm not priests, but in between parishes. When I came here 4 years ago, and it took me 9 months to find a parish that didn't feel like a club, that didn't have priests doing things that are highly questionable during Mass. I go to a Novus Ordo Mass. I don't go to a Latin Mass. I like the Novus Ordo in terms of the vernacular and Gregorian chant that should be there at every single Latin Mass according to Vatican II. But it's the fact that there's a lot of priests that just do what they want. And so if those priests are in charge of other priests, that could become a problem. And, case in point, in the last 5 years, there have been several accounts in the Archdiocese where people who come to kneel and receive on the tongue are denied by priests when they have a right to receive as such. myself included, I was not denied outright. I ended up still receiving it, but I had to actually explain to the priest why I had a right to receive. And that shouldn't happen. And, that's where my reservation comes from, where you have these priests who are in charge, but either don't know what their limits are or just do things their own way. And that's a problem. And that's honestly part of the problem. Part of why we're here right now is because there was a lack of emphasis on certain things that really should have been given emphasis to. For example, the Mass done appropriately in the Novus Ordo. Again, I'm going to emphasize the Novus Ordo. So, I guess going on, I do have hope for this. I have extreme hope. I think this is really good, especially under the Archbishop, because he has shown that he, when things have happened, that he's been orthodox and he's been following, what the Church teaches. And I'm very glad he's my spiritual father in the Archdiocese of Detroit. I do want to bring this all around to Pope Benedict, because, Pope Benedict did actually talk about this. So I'm at a Catholic Answers forum, but these are the quotes from Faith and Future in 2009. The Church will become small and will have to start afresh, more or less from the beginning. She will no longer be able to inhabit many of the edifices she built in prosperity, as the number of her adherents diminishes. She will lose many of her social privileges. It will be hard going for the Church, for the process of crystallization and clarification will cost her much valuable energy. It will make her poor and cause her to become the Church of the meek. The process will be long and wearisome, as was the road from the false progressivism on the eve of the French Revolution. When a bishop might be thought smart if he made fun of dogmas and even insinuated that the existence of God was by no means certain. But when the trial of this sifting is past, a great power will flow from a more spiritualized and simplified church. Men in a totally planned world will find themselves unspeakably lonely. If they have completely lost sight of God, they will feel the whole horror of their poverty. Then they will discover the little flock of believers as something wholly new. They will discover it as a hope that is meant for them, an answer for which they have always been searching in secret. And so it seems certain to me that the Church is facing very hard times. The real crisis has scarcely begun. We will have to count on terrific upheavals, but I'm equally certain about what will remain at the end. Not the Church of the political cult, which is dead already, but the Church of faith. She may well no longer be the dominant social power to the extent that she was until recently, but she will enjoy a fresh blossoming and be seen as man's home, where he will find life and hope beyond death. This is why I have so much hope for this, is because this was kind of prophesied by the Pope Benedict Emeritus, because we are getting smaller. You don't create these families of parishes because you're doing awesome. You create them because there's a problem. And there's a problem, on several levels. One of them is obviously financial. Another is the culture, because, you can go to two different parishes and sometimes even two different times and just have a completely different experience. And, given the fact that we are the Catholic Latin Rite, we really should be uniformed. And this will help that if obviously the appropriate Orthodox priests are involved. The emphasis on the Orthodox may hit people the wrong way, but the reality is we need to deal with that. There are some priests that are not Orthodox. They allow a bunch of liturgical abuses, and they promote certain things that they really shouldn't be promoting as priests. This is a way of potentially answering some of those in a way that's also respectful of their positions. I trust the Archbishop to do what he needs to do. And the emphasis is obviously going to be on the faith, on the Holy Spirit guiding, and getting us spiritually fed. If you disagree or you don't like my opinions, obviously leave them in the comments of the video. Obviously, depending on the social media, it's easier to do it on the video than it is to do it in the individual social medias, but whatever. If you liked this, please like or subscribe. I am trying to do this more often, where I promote certain things that the diocese, the Archdiocese does, or just comment on them. I'd like to talk about it because our spiritual father just said something and we should pay attention. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.